Welcome back. It is 7:20, the Big 550 KTRS. Rick Edlund sitting in for McGraw-Millhaven. And is an economic tsunami about to hit Missouri? My next two guests say yes, and it's coming from the West. Joining me now in studio are two gentlemen from the Show Me Institute, the co-founder and president of Show Me, Rex Sinquefield, and policy analyst Patrick Ishmael. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for getting up early this morning to come on in. I understand it's getting a little dicey outside, huh?
It's getting beautiful and rainy and stormy and lightning. I love it.
You love all that stuff. All
Why
right.
do you think I moved back to Missouri?
You should, yeah, you should be our traffic reporter then. That's perfect. Point of disclosure, I am the communications director for the Show Me Institute, which for those of you who don't know is a free market think tank. You can view our work on showmeinstitute.org. But I wanted to have Rex and Patrick on today because I think the main issue we're going to be talking about today is very important for all people across Missouri. A commentary we are just now releasing is titled, "Can Missouri Stop the Bleeding in a New Border War with Kansas?" Now, if you don't know, Governor Sam Brownback of Kansas, under Governor Sam Brownback, I should say, Kansas is lowering its taxes, both on individuals and companies. How much? Well, let's start with the numbers. Patrick?
Sure. This year, Kansas reduced taxes on personal income from about 6.5% to 4.9%. That is now lower than Missouri's tax on personal income. And taken on its own, that's a big deal. But they also reduced the tax on limited liability companies, S corporations, and sole proprietorships to zero. They are no longer taxing those sorts of companies.
Okay, those sorts of companies are basically small companies. Is that what we're talking about?
These are by and large small businesses. There are some larger LLCs and S corporations as well. But what Kansas is really saying is that it's open for business, that if you are one of the drivers of growth, if you're a company that is bringing jobs to Kansas, whether you're in Kansas now or looking for a favorable tax environment, that Kansas is the place to be. And that exposes a lot of Missouri companies.
Okay, so the individual income tax is now being lowered to 4.9% in Kansas. In Missouri, it's 6%, is it not?
It is.
Okay. All right, so those are the numbers. Rex, you believe this is a big threat to Missouri. Why and how?
I think this is a massive tsunami that is going to hit Missouri. Now, I also want to fully disclose that I gave money to promoters of this in Kansas, and I'm giving money to promoters of the same kind of thing in Oklahoma as a way to get something going here in Missouri. Our General Assembly has been possessed with inertia. The big part of this tax cut is on businesses, all of these pass-through entities, and that sounds a bit technical, but I believe about 80% of all corporations in America are what we call S-corps or LLCs. This just means that the companies themselves do not pay taxes, but the shareholders pay taxes on all of the company's profits every year, whether the profits are distributed or not. And Kansas and Brownback just came up with a stroke of genius. This thing is so brilliant. They basically said all of those distributions, all those profit distributions will be taxed at zero. Now, it's not just small companies. There are some very large sub-S corporations. My previous company, Dimensional Fund Advisors, we manage now $250 billion, one of the largest investment companies in the world, and we're an S-corp. So lots of companies are S-corps, most of them. In fact, if you're a corporation that needs a lot of capital, like Boeing, you got to buy a lot of equipment, then you have to be organized as what's called a C-corp, which means you pay taxes at the company level. Your shareholders do not pay taxes unless you pay them a dividend. So we're talking about most corporations here. And this is just going to be a massive wave that's hitting Missouri.
Okay, but what's the result of this? What is going to be the net result of this? Are you talking about companies moving across the state line? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, I am talking exactly about that. That's what's going to happen. In fact, yesterday at a Show Me Institute event, somebody came up to me and we started talking about this afterwards, and he said, yeah, the day Kansas passed that legislation, the day Brownback signed that bill, he said, my friend put his house on the market and moved to Kansas. He was living in Kansas City, and he's the owner of a small business. And, Rick, this is going to happen by not the hundreds, but by the thousands. And Normandy Beach in this is Kansas City and all of those counties that border Kansas. But it's going to hit St. Louis, too, and it's going to hit Columbia and Springfield. Anybody who's the owner or part owner of an S corporation, a pass-through entity, is going to have to seriously think about moving.
I grew up in the Kansas City area, just a few blocks on the Kansas side of State Line Road, which is, Patrick, you lived in Kansas City as well.
I went to a high school on State Line Road.
Yeah, there you go. So you know how easy it is to walk a few blocks and all of a sudden you're in a different state.
Exactly.
And most of the development since I was a little boy there has been on the Kansas side. Johnson County, Overland Park, all those areas south of Kansas City proper have mushroomed like crazy. And so your point is this is only going to add to that.
Oh, it's going to multiply many times over. You know, I think part of the reason people were moving in the past, I'm not 100% sure of this, is that Kansas's schools are very good. Well, now they have the most inviting tax environment as well. And let's keep in mind that in Kansas City proper, we're not talking about a 6% differential. We're talking about a 7% differential because the city of Kansas City, like St. Louis, has an earnings tax. You know, so if you're a small business, and let's say your profits are $2 or $3 million a year, and you've got just 2 or 3 owners, you know, just do the math. 7% differential on $3 million, it doesn't cost you that much to move.
Yeah, and there are about $3 billion worth of companies that just border the state of Kansas. We're really exposed on that side of the state, but also statewide.
Okay, there has been a border war among Kansas and Missouri and along the Kansas-Missouri state line for a while now, each state trying to lure businesses with tax credits and incentives, especially in the Kansas City area. How extensive has that been?
It's been a big, big business. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in tax credits. That doesn't count the local tax incentive like TIFs and abatements that have been used to try to attract companies back and forth. And oftentimes, you know, they're moving as few as 3 or 4 miles to get into a better taxing position. And what Kansas has done is they basically said, well, we're not going to really play this game. We're not going to pick the winners and losers. We're going to make everybody a winner and just set the tax rate to 0.
Give me an example. Wasn't it AMC or some company like that just moved just a few blocks across the state line, in effect?
AMC is one. There's a neuroscience company that moved earlier this year. I think it was 3.7 miles. It is widespread. And Kansas City and the state of Kansas have traded businesses for decades, and the net effect, I mean, that's not how you create growth. How you create growth is by setting stable, low tax rates, and the most stable and low tax rate that you can have is 0, and that's where Kansas has gone.
We've got to cut away for a break, but Rex and Patrick, I want you to stay here. Let's continue to talk about this, and I want to talk about our neighboring states and also the rest of Missouri, because a lot of people might say, listening to our conversation so far, hey, okay, this is a big deal for Kansas City, for Joplin, maybe Springfield, but so what if you live in Hannibal or, you know, Cape, whatever the case may be. But there's much more to this story, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. We need to go to a break right now. This is the Big 550 KTRS.
McGraw in the Morning continues on the Big 550 KTRS.
And welcome back. Coming up on 7:37 here on the Big 550 KTRS. Rick Edlund sitting in for McGraw Millhaven. My guests in studio are Rex Sinquefield, the president of the Show Me Institute, and a senior policy analyst there as well, Patrick Ishmael. We are talking about what has happened in Kansas. They have lowered the tax rates over there, both for individuals and companies, and significantly, I might add. We had been talking about the border war specifically, and we're talking about the effect on an area like Kansas City, Missouri, as opposed to Kansas City, Kansas. Yes, there are two, as Patrick and I well know. Some of our listeners here in the St. Louis area might be saying, okay, that's an issue for western Kansas, for Kansas City, Joplin, maybe even Springfield. But why is that going to matter here? Rex?
Oh, it's going to matter all over the state, because if you're an S corporation, a private corporation that is profitable, you're going to have to consider about the 6% or 7% differential that you have. 7% if you happen to live in St. Louis or in Kansas City, 6% anywhere else in the state. If you can increase your profits, your take-home pay 6% every year compared to the current state, you're going to take a look at that. And a lot of small businesses, many of them, make several million a year. And this sounds like big numbers to the average factory worker, and those are big numbers, but it's very common. So we could have devastation. Now, but it's not just throughout Missouri. It's throughout the entire Midwest. Believe me, the whole Midwest knows. Now, we got to give credit to Governor Brownback and to the other senior leaders from Kansas City. I've met with them several times now, and believe it or not, they want Missouri to imitate them. They want all of the states in the Midwest to become no-income tax states and create a tax haven.
Well, this is a very important point. We're talking about Kansas at this moment, but other states in the region are either talking about this or are doing this as well. Isn't that right, Patrick?
Yes. Nebraska has reduced its personal income tax just a little bit, and they've really primed the pump for further reductions. Oklahoma is looking to get rid of its income tax completely. And what Missouri needs to see Kansas move as is basically an impact, and the ripples are rippling off of these tax reforms now into bordering states. And the impact is going to be not just in the region, but across the country. I mean, just like we have a global economy, Missouri is competing against its sister states. And to remain competitive, the state of Missouri has to implement some serious reforms.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the current gubernatorial campaign, have you heard either gubernatorial candidate talk about the tsunami that just hit Missouri? I mean, you cannot exaggerate how big this is, what a real problem. It's a catastrophic problem for Missouri if they don't respond. And everybody knows that I've sponsored some statewide ballot initiatives, but we don't have time for a ballot initiative on this. The next opportunity is 2 years. 2 years, a lot of western Missouri will be gone. They're going to have to learn to speak Kansan.
Well, you hear people talk about jobs all the time, jobs for this, jobs for that. But one of the things that we have emphasized at the Show Me Institute is something that we think is bad public policy, that the way a lot of government officials think they promote jobs is through tax incentives and tax credits, right?
It's very common, and the problem is, the idea behind credits is to somehow cure some market failures, but unfortunately it's used. Tax credits, tax increment financing, local tax incentives are used as the tip of the development spear. And a better way toward growth is to lower taxes for everyone, make sure that everyone has a fair shot at competing, and letting them keep more of their hard-earned money. And I think that instead of going the incentive route, you can reduce taxes. One example is the corporate income tax in the state of Missouri brings in about $300 million every single year. The state, in development tax credits, issues about $400 million. I think in a really reasonable way, you can basically say that the corporate income tax subsidizes the largesse of our tax credit program. You could eliminate the corporate income tax just by eliminating the same amount in tax credits. And instead of picking and choosing winners, we should make everybody a winner.
Yeah, and who gets tax credits? It's the fat cats who are politically connected. Have you ever heard a factory worker going down to Jefferson City and say, hey, if I work and stay here another year, will you guys cut my taxes? No, that isn't going to happen. But the big corporations, they go and say, give us 15, 50, 75 million, and they get these tax credits. That's what's so incredibly brilliant about what Brownback has done. He said, I'm basically going to give a tax credit to everybody. Everybody now gets a zero income tax rate. Now, Missouri has had a terrible growth rate for the last 100 years. Missouri hasn't had a double-digit growth decade in 100 years. We're 48th in growth right now. That's the context for what Kansas has done. If Missouri were a fast-growing state, they could say, we're not going to grow as fast. Missouri's not growing at all.
Isn't there sort of an attitude that things are okay in Missouri, though? This brings me, I'm glad you brought that up, because we also have a paper at the Show Me Institute that's already been released and already on our website called Slip Sliding Away, the Weak Relative Growth of the Missouri Economy by our chief economist, Joe Hasleg, and Mike Pogorski, who, along with you, is one of the co-founders of the Show Me Institute. So that begs the question, how poorly are we doing in Missouri?
We're at the bottom. We are, of all of our surrounding states, we are the worst. It's that simple. And nationwide, we're 48th out of 50, heading toward the bottom. And this has been going on a long time. People might feel comfortable, and that is part of the problem, frankly. We have polled, others that I know have polled the state of Missouri, and people feel pretty good. But what happens when you're a slow-growth state? What happens when kids get out of tech school or out of college and they want a job? Where do they go? They have to leave the state of Missouri. We're breaking up families. Parents watch their kids go elsewhere to get jobs, and it's happening all the time. You just got to look at the job numbers. Over the last 12 years, $1.5 billion of adjusted gross income has left Missouri. This is net, has left Missouri and gone elsewhere. If you look at the no-income tax states like Tennessee, like Texas, the adjusted gross income that has moved into those states is enormous. In Tennessee, over the same period, $6 billion AGI moved in. Texas, $17 billion moved in. Missouri, people are leaving. And let's face it, we've all got an easy carcass to take advantage of, and that's Illinois. And we should be piling on. Do you know, every governor of all the neighboring states went to Illinois and said we're open for business, except a governor in Missouri who decided to go to China.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Rex Sinquefield and Patrick Ishmael of the Show Me Institute, thank you very much for joining us. ShowMeInstitute.org is the website. And you, Patrick, have a paper on corporate income tax and getting rid of the corporate income tax coming out very soon.
Yeah, it'll be very soon.
One more thing. We're on Facebook and Twitter as well, right?
That's exactly right. On Twitter, it's at Show Me. On Facebook, you can just search Show Me Institute. You'll find us.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. This is the Big 550 KTRS.